practice on Pesach in terms of eating and cooking and so on. And it's not easy, and Judith wasn't used to it. And when we became, we got married and lived together and so on, she really, really, really wanted to have kidneyot because it can just make it much easier having rice and lentils and chickpeas and so on. It's not nearly as onerous. So, I did a lot of research, and it's a whole other story about the specific question of kidneyot. But I got interested in the question of whether or not, sort of what it meant to be, am I really meaningfully Ashkenazi? Even though, my family came to the United States in the early 20th century from Ukraine, to what extent what does that mean? Is it racial? Is it sort of, what exactly does it mean? So that's sort of how I got into the topic. And I actually wrote for a class in rabbinical school, a kind of tshuva, a responsum on the issue of on this specific issue, not on kidneyot, but on the Sephardic Ashkenazi thing. So that's sort of how I got into it to begin with. When I'm getting bad thunderstorm here, lost power a little while ago. So now, okay. Sorry for the weather there. Sounds like it's a little difficult. So anyway, so that's one piece. I want to get into the text, but the other background is that there is there are obviously many different ways of understanding kind of the broad arc of Jewish history. But certainly one way, just one, I think it's an important way, is to see a kind of tension between centrifugal and centripetal forces, right? Between those things which keep us together and those things which tend to, lead to fragmentation, or, put more positively, diversity and difference. We have no Pope, we have no Vatican. Needless to say, in the modern era, there are all kinds of divisions among the various denominations. We'll talk about this later. Within various denominations, there are serious differences. There are obviously serious differences between religious Jews and secular Jews. There are just so many differences, right? So at the end of the day, what keeps us together, right? What keeps us on the same page, and what forces can help preserve some sense of unity and coherence among all of that diversity. So the fact is that diversity is not just a product of the modern world. It's been there for a long time. There never was a pope. And if you go back 400, 500, 600 years, right, you had a great deal of a difference in variety. And I'm sure, you all know this in various customs. If you were in Marrakesh or Fez, in Morocco, or if you're in Yemen, or you're in Bialystok, in Poland, or Vilna, they were all Jews, but they had very serious differences, needless to say, in language, in food, in dress, but also in some very important customs and rituals. And of course, nuschaot, right, in the songs and melodies, which were, and the actual liturgy that's said in synagogues. So again, I want to ask the question, what kept them all with a coherent sense of being part of the Jewish people, but also preserving this very rich diversity and difference among these various communities. And I would even say that there's just long been a tension that expressed in Jewish religious texts themselves. So, for example, there's long been a kind of battle between the need to create a centralized code, a collection of Jewish law in one place with one set of rules, versus giving lots of leeway and flexibility for different understandings of Jewish law. So when Maimonides put together his famous code, the Mishneh Torah, none too modestly called the Mishneh Torah, which means the second Torah. That was his choice, right, to call that. In his introduction, he very consciously says, look, the center isn't holding. People are taking on, our far-flung people have all kinds of practices and customs and laws, and we risk being split apart if we don't all stay on the same page. So that's why Maimonides, the Rambam, am putting together the Shulchan Aruch, the Mishneh Torah, right? So that there'll be one source so we can all be on the same page, right? And he didn't even put sources, right? He just put, this is what the law is, this is what the law is. And it, on the one hand, was immediately accepted by many communities as a kind of a key authority. And on the other, many people thought they rejected it and even thought it was heretical because it did not list sources and sought to insisted that everybody be on the same page. Famously, when Yosef Karo produced the Shulchan Aruch, the great code of law in the 16th century, it was a response to a real problem. I spilled some milk in my meat stew. What do? I don't necessarily have the time or the skills to go through all the sources and all the commentaries and figure out what to do. I just need a basic go-to answer. I want to take a book off the shelf and find out what I do, right? So he did that. He gave the answer. But as soon as the Shulchan Aruch was published, it created a storm of controversy because many rabbis said, what are you doing? We here in Marrakesh, we in Berlin or Prague will determine, the rabbis here will determine how you're supposed to figure out the problem of the milk and the meat stew and, whatever other questions they had. Don't tell us that there's one book that has all the answers. And of course, no sooner did he publish it, but that an Ashkenazi, Karo was Sephardic, an Ashkenazi gloss on the Shulchan Aruch immediately was produced, which now is published on every page. And then shortly thereafter, 1 million commentaries were produced, making the Shulchan Aruch actually a very difficult and complex source and not just the easy go-to source that it was meant to be. So these are all tensions that have been part of our history, keeping everyone on the same page, a central authority. We're all part of the same people doing the same thing. You put on tefillin in Mendota Heights or Minneapolis, St. Paul. I put on tefillin in Vancouver. We're doing the same thing, same tefillin, same blessings. We're all part of the Jewish people. But what about regional variation and difference? So that's the background. Why don't we dive into the text? And I'm very interested to hear your responses to these texts. So feel free to try, and maybe Orit can help. Like people do that little raised hand thing, so I'll know because I can't see you all because I'm looking at this text. Or you can just speak up, and then and I'll figure out who's speaking. Okay, so the first text is from Rabbi David Galinkin, who's a leading halachic scholar and posek, a halachic decider for the conservative movement in Israel. And he writes as follows. He wrote it in Hebrew, and I translated it into English. In every generation, there was a persistent tension between the will to preserve ancient customs and the need to adapt the custom and law to new reality and changing conditions. Moreover, there's an ambivalence even within the same person, the same legal authority. Here are two examples from among many. On the one hand, Rabbeinu Tam, that is Rabbi Yaakov ben Meir of France in the 12th century, taught that the custom of our ancestors is Torah. Custom is binding law, minhag, right? Minhag, custom, meaning local custom, the way we do things in, Yechupetzville, whatever, like those are customs. You might wear a particular kind of tefillin. You might eat something special on Pesach, some sort of kitniot. We don't. We're in Yechupetzville, right? It says these customs, right, they have the power of law. The custom has the power to cancel out law. But on the other hand, Rabbeinu Tam said, the same person said, that custom is a confounding hell, gehinom lemafreya, and that there are customs that should not be relied upon even when we are told that it is the custom of the land. So, custom shmastam, they're really a problem. And this is the judgment of the Ramah. That's Rabbi Moshe Isserles of Poland, who is the main Ashkenazi interpreter and glossator of the Shulchan Aruch. He said, on the one hand, he writes, we should not eliminate or ridicule any custom because it is not for nothing that it has become set in tradition. But on the other, he writes, so what if we change the thing? Since in the time of the early sages, it was permitted to change custom according to the time. Sha'im lishanot haminhag lefi hazman. Right? So here you have, even in the same person, they have this ambivalence that local custom is authoritative, and on the other hand, local custom is a problem and is not necessarily binding. And by the way, the reason I'm talking about local custom is much of the difference between Sephardi and Ashkenazi practice has to do with custom, right? Nobody's going to say, oh, my Torah has 5 books, your Torah has 6, right? Or Shabbat is actually on Tuesday, right? Those are fundamental things. That's not the custom. But, how long do you wait to eat dairy after you eat meat in kashrut, right? And there are different customs. Everybody says, well, you can't eat them together, but how do you separate them? So that might be in the realm of custom or in law, but a kind of rabbinic law, not Torah law. Okay. So everybody clear so far? Any questions up to this point? We good? Okay. Excellent. Now we're going to move on to the Gemara in the Talmud in Yevamot. Here we go. Now this is the first serious text, so I'll take it slowly and carefully. Here we go. Tanan Hatam. We learned in a Mishnah elsewhere. The Megillah on Purim, we're talking about Purim, is read on the 11th of Adar, or the 12th, the 13th, the 14th, or the 15th. Neither earlier nor later. Now let me stop there. That is weird, because if you read Megillat Esther, it seems, the story itself says it's either on the 14th or the 15th. This 11th, 12th, 13th, nowhere is it mentioned, okay? Now I'm going to skip down here, because Rashi notices the same thing, right? And he comments, we'll get to this to separate things. He says, it appears that if Jews practice over 2 different, there we go. When those who live in small villages read the Megillah on entry day, on Mondays and Thursdays, when villagers came to cities to attend judicial courts, those in bigger cities read on the 14th and those in walled cities on the 15th. So the rabbis basically said, there are Jews out in the provinces who can't come in on the 14th or 15th to hear the Megillah. So therefore, we're going to expand it to the 11th, 12th, and 13th because, right, they do come in to attend court, and it's also market day on Mondays and Thursdays. So therefore, we rabbis say, you can also read the Megillah on those days. Now, back to our text. Reish Lakish said to Rabbi Yochanan, read here, do not gash yourself, right? So let me explain this. There's that in Deuteronomy, in the Torah, it says, lo titgo to do, okay? It's a mysterious rule. What does it mean, don't gash yourself? We won't go into that. But then the Gemara interprets this line to mean, which means do not form into separate groups, right? So it says in the actual text, lo titgo to do, lo tasu agudot agudot. So it's a word play, right? It says in the Torah, lo titgo to do, don't gash yourself. And then taking it totally out of context, what Rabbi Yochanan says is, no, it actually means don't form into separate groups. In other words, you're telling me you're going to have different days for a holiday, the 11th, the 12th, the 13th. You're going to have different Jewish groups, who have their own Purim. We have to be on the same page. It says clearly in Megillat Esther, it's the 14th, and then for walled cities like Jerusalem, it's the 15th. End of story, right? So if what if I say Pesach is in February because it's convenient for me, right? Then you'll lose the sense of coherence that keeps us together. So Rabbi Yochanan says, no, this is no good. So I'll continue. This is the editor. Why doesn't the reading of the scroll of Esther in different places, different times violate the prohibition against breaking into factions? And if you're going to say we can do it different times, we know that we're not supposed to break into factions. Rabbi Yochanan said to him, but wait a second, have you not taught until now, in a place where the people were accustomed to perform labor on Passover Eve until noon, one may do so on that day? I'll explain this after I read it. In a place where people were accustomed not to perform labor, one may not do so. This shows that different places can have different customs without violating the prohibition against dividing into factions. Let me explain. Apparently, according to the Talmud, it's before Pesach, you're supposed to get ready for Pesach, right? But on the other hand, you have to make a living, and people, were involved in business. So if Pesach is on a Thursday night, when do you have to stop work to get ready for Pesach, right? So it says here in a place where people were accustomed to perform labor on Passover until midday. So in some places, the rabbi said, it's okay, you can work until noon and then stop working. You have to stop working, right? They can do so in a place where people are accustomed not to. Don't do it. So it seems clear that there was this notion that different people had different customs, right? So if you live in Plonsk, right, then you can do X, and it's okay there. But we live, over here in Lublin, and we had to do things differently, and that's okay. And that does not, in fact, violate the prohibition on forming agudot, right, different groups. Okay. So there seems to be this sort of balance already. Don't form into different groups, but different places do things different ways. You have kitniot, I don't have kitniot, that's okay. Or you have kitniot, I don't have kitniot, what are you doing? You're ruining the unity of the Jewish people, right? Both things are evident here in the Talmud, okay? And Rashi here just comments, do not form separate groups. It appears as if Jews practice or observe two different Torahs when those who live in a village read it on one day, and those, right? So, Dinireh kenohagin, right? Shnei Torot, shtei Torot, shikorin kfarim, and so on. Two different Torahs, like that's the ultimate nightmare, right? That there'll be two different Torahs, that we won't all be on the same page. Okay, so let me stop there. I want you to try and think of, it's interesting if you think of a case, even in conservative shuls, if you have an example where people do things so differently in different places that it seems problematic, two different Torahs. I mean, I have to say there, I know some conservative synagogues start services at one point in the service in the morning, others start at different times. Some conservative shuls, what else do they do this different? Obviously, they have different tunes. Oh, Heichi Kedusha, right? Some will do Heichi Kedusha. You have to do Heichi Kedusha. You have to speed things up. Others, no. You have to do full repetition, right? I don't know if those things would count as two different Torahs. I'll just tell you a quick story. I can't remember. Please forgive me if I told this already during my visit. When I was an intern at a struggling little conservative shul in Burbank, California, and it was my first Friday night there, and I asked, before I began L'chad Odi, which tune they were accustomed to singing. Did they have a particular tune they liked? And they looked at me like I was from Mars. They said, no, just do the tune. And I said, well, what do you mean, the tune? I said, no, you do the tune. And they literally had been singing the same L'chad Odi tune every Friday night for like 30 years. There was only one tune. And I told them, well, they're actually, I think I know like 13 or 14 tunes. They were shocked and appalled, right? They thought, how can there can only be one L'chad Odi tune, right? So you can see even in that little petty thing. Okay. All right, continuing. So here's the Rambam, Mishneh Torah, his code of law. He says, this commandment also includes a prohibition against there being two courts which follow different customs in a single city, since this can cause great strife. Do not gash yourselves can be understood to mean do not separate into different factions, right? It can cause, his worry is, shedavar zeh gorem lamachlokot gedolot. It will cause great machlokot, right? Great disagreements. So even in the 12th century, they'll joke about, two Jews, three opinions. They seem to be aware of it. And there was a real danger. I think people felt a concrete danger that the Jewish people could spin into different peoples, different religions, and so on, without a pope, without a Vatican, without any central authority at all. Right? This is the danger. Okay. All right. We'll do one more text, then we're going to sort of make a shift here. And here we have a sort of different spin on what we just read. Rambam is very concerned about factions. This is why he wrote the Mishneh Torah. But then we have a Rabbi Shmuel di Medina of Salonika, who has a great acronym. I love rabbinic acronyms like, Rashi, Rambam. So his is the Maharashdam. The Maharashdam It's Rabbi Shmuel de Medina of Salonika in the 16th century, and he says as follows. What the Gemara, which we just read, which we read above, said, only applies to an individual or to individuals who come to a place which acts in a more strict manner, in which case they are nullified to the city people who were there. So let's say I live in Minneapolis and I move to St. Paul, okay, or Mendota Heights, whatever, right? So I come to a place which is stricter. Those slackers in Minneapolis are completely lax. Then I move from St. Paul. They're super strict, right? And what happens is I'm nullified to the city people who are there. That is to say, I have to give up my slack Minneapolis ways and adopt the ways of St. Paul because it's stricter. But I'm just an individual. But when an entire community comes, it is as if they are still living in their city and they follow their own customs. And those who are already in the city follow their customs, and there is no problem of lo titgo to do, meaning forming into agudot, into groups. Does everybody follow? So it's one thing if I move from Minneapolis as just Adam Rubin, I have to adjust. I have to adapt to those crazy St. Paul, customs. But if I bring along all of, what's that place called? Minnetonka? I don't know, or St. Louis Park, whatever, and we all move as one, we get to keep our customs, right? And we're just those crazy people from the West who go to our, have our special custom, and we have to figure out a way to live with the St. Paul people who have their customs, and each group has their own custom, okay? Does this make sense? Everybody with me? Okay. So far we've gotten the sense, we've got this tension between forming into separate groups, but an honoring of diversity here, and a notion that while the individual might have to adjust, as a community and by the way, I would say this means that minhag, custom, is not a function of place, it's a function of community, right? It moves with the community. It's not just, it's not just because it was in Lublin. If a whole bunch of people from Lublin move to New York City, they take their custom with them, and the custom still holds, right? It wasn't just because it wasn't like in the air in Lublin, okay? It goes with them, okay. So now we're going to go the other way. You'll see here a very different direction. So this is a famous text in the Talmud, Pesachim 50b, and it notes, this is kind of the source text for, it's the source text for the whole idea of custom being important. The people of Baishan, which nobody knows where Baishan is, but it's probably Beit Shan, which is in the north of Israel, northeast Israel, had the custom not to travel from Sur or Tyre in modern, on the west coast of Lebanon in the south, to Sidon or Sidon on Erev Shabbat to do business in order to ensure enough time for Shabbat preparation. So you have these people, these Jews who live in Beit Shan, and even if they had business to do, I don't know what that is, 40 miles, something like that, up in Lebanon, they would not go and do it on Friday morning because they wouldn't give them time to prepare for Shabbat. Their children came before Rabbi Yochanan. Remember him? He was already talking about this earlier. And they said to him, this was possible for our ancestors, but not possible for us. We need to do the business. Our businesses are failing, right? We need to do business during the first part of Friday. And for whatever reason, our ancestors were able to do this. We're not able to. Rabbi Yochanan said back to them, your ancestors have already accepted it upon themselves, implying that it was binding for their children as well, as it is said, hear my children, the instruction of your father, and do not abandon the teaching of your mother. It's a song I sing to Naamah every night when she goes to bed. Shema beni musar avicha ve'al titosh torati mecha, from the book of Proverbs, right? Don't abandon what you've learned from your parents. Permitted matters that others are accustomed to hold or deal with as a prohibition, you're not allowed to make them permitted in front of them, right? You can't in front of them doesn't mean literally in front of them. Like while they're alive, you can't do it and they know about it, right? So what does this mean? It means that what my parents and grandparents and great-parents' did has a kind of binding quality. It has a hold on me. It makes a claim on me, right? So when they come to Rabbi Yochanan and say, look, our ancestors used to do this custom, we can't do it anymore. Rabbi Yochanan said, no. It doesn't matter. You didn't have to agree to it. There's something about the past. There's something about what your people, your group, the Beit Shan people did that makes a claim on you. And you are not free to throw it overboard, okay? So this is really, if you go back to the Keepneo thing and to Sephardic stuff and so on, this is really, I think, at the foundation of it. If I have family that is from, when I was in Seattle, there's a huge group of Seattle Jews who trace their ancestry to the island of Rhodes, right? Greek island. And there are still all these customs at their synagogues and foods they make and all kinds of things that come from Rhodes. It's already, 100 or over 100 years later, right? And many of those people feel themselves bound to follow these customs and traditions, even though they didn't choose them, even though they were born as free citizens of the United States. They can do whatever they want, technically. Here, there's a sense that you're not supposed to abandon the custom and tradition of your forebears, right? And so it makes it powerful. And that's why earlier we saw, remember Rabbeinu Tam and the Ramah, they said, custom is like law, right? Custom is incredibly powerful. And this is where you get it from, right? Custom is very powerful, okay? All right, last text, and then I have some concluding thoughts, and I'd love to hear your response to them. And it's sort of where I make my own personal argument and conclusions from all of this. Okay. So this is from Rabbi Yitzchak ben Sheshet, another great acronym, the Rivash, Rabbi Yitzchak ben Sheshet of Barcelona. And he was chased out of Barcelona and lived for a while in Saragossa, or as they call it in Spain, Zaragoza, right? And then he ended up in Valencia. So he writes, the inhabitants of a city have the ability to make an enactment binding upon them, that is themselves, and their descendants. And we find that the Ramban, in his Mishpat HaCherem, Ramban is Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, right, the great Ramban, Nachmanides, wrote regarding any communal acceptance, that it is binding upon themselves and their descendants, as we find at the acceptance of the Torah and in the Megillah and fast days. This is the foundation of our religion, right? It's because our ancestors accepted Torah that it's still accepted by us. It's a kind of deferring to the past in a powerful way. And even if they did not explicitly accept upon themselves, but rather they merely acted in a certain way, making offense to the Torah, their children are also obligated to act accordingly, as we see regarding the Bnei Beishan. That's Beit Shan. Remember, we just read about that. So they have to do it too. Okay, so there's something about custom, which the Rivash is saying has a binding quality to it, right? And by the way, this really rubs up against the entire fabric and grain of modern Western life, because at the very core of that is the notion of the autonomous self, and that I choose who I am and what my life will be, right? And also, I don't know, especially in the United States, even more than, say, Europe, if there's as much regard for and concern about how the past weighs on and should determine, right, what I decide to do in my life. America famously is forward-looking, breaking from tradition, and so on. This idea that we have to defer to our ancestors, very, very, I would say rubs up against the grain of how we live our lives. Okay, here's the controversial part. I don't know if it's controversial. In small circles, it might be controversial, but here's what I conclude, and I'm going to go through. So this is sort of what I make of it. So for most of Jewish history, travel was dangerous, expensive, and therefore rare. Since most individuals avoided such journeys, particular customs and practices developed in each location over time. So if you lived in Lublin, Poland, or Bialystok in the 18th century, you almost never left. You might go to a market in some neighboring town or something, but you were there. That was who you were and how you grew up. It was where you spent your life. The content of prayers, melodies, kashrut practices, details of life cycle ceremonies, etc., varied, at times widely, from one locale to the next, notwithstanding broad halakhic standards that maintain certain common practices. So, for example, I'll give you a great example. There was a common custom in Morocco that when, I think, alas, it was only for boys at the time, when a boy would turn 5 years old in certain towns and cities in Morocco, the Jewish community would put a crown of flowers in the little boy's head on his hair, and he would be paraded through one of the streets of the neighborhood and into the synagogue, right, where they would do a hachnasat cheder, right, entering basically Jewish education, right, and there would be a wood board, right, and they would have a little bit of honey on each of the Hebrew letters, right, and so the boy would recite the Aleph and then eat a little honey, and then the Bet, and eat a little. Why? Because Torah should be sweet, right, and learning should be sweet. So this was just like a custom. You won't find a mitzvah to do this, right? This was like just a thing that they did in Morocco. Very, very beautiful, right? So, and this is how people would grow up, and this was the custom that they grew up in, and would shape who they were, right? Okay. To move or travel from one location undoubtedly involved jarring shifts in dress, language, climate, architectural styles, relations with the non-Jewish majority, and the dense web of customs and traditions. So if you move from Fez in Morocco to, let's say, to a town in Italy, right? Even if you're in the Jewish community there and welcome there, I mean, it must have been so incredibly jarring on almost every level, right? But today, I'm using the conservative movement's methodology, right, of using history to understand Jewish law. Today, traveling between cities and even countries is relatively safe and inexpensive. Jews are constantly confronted with an endless multiplicity of beliefs, traditions, and customs, not only through travel, but also via film, television, newspapers, magazines, the internet, and so on. People move frequently for their studies, professional opportunities, or to experience different cultures. Moreover, modern life is characterized by the ability of people, as I mentioned before, to choose for themselves who they are and wish to become, fashioning identities out of a buffet of choices. We no longer live in a world in which one's fate or destiny is shaped exclusively or even primarily by the custom and culture of the place she or he was born in, right? So we're just in a different conceptual universe completely. And I submit that the genie can't be put back in the bottle. We live in a world of radical Jewish diversity. There are differences between secular and religious Jews, between various denominations, varieties within denominations. So like in Orthodoxy, open Orthodoxy on its left edge versus centrist, the right and left of the Reform and conservative movements. I mean, when I taught at HUC, the difference between classical reform and the sort of, coast, the Reform movement on the coasts was like two different religions. I mean, they were very different. Right? Between those who live in Israel, North America, Europe, etc., even those Jews who are ostensibly the most homogeneous, the ultra-Orthodox, are riven by conflict. So there's Hasidic versus Yeshivish, right? The Yeshivish is sort of non-Hasidic ultra-Orthodox. Chabad versus other Hasidim. Different factions within Satmar, like the Satmar Hasidim fight with each other, literally, physically, right? They have different rebbes they don't accept. There is a movement between and among the groups, and hence established and fixed continuous lines of custom is difficult, if not impossible. Furthermore, how crucial are customs for Jews today? So for example, if a modern Orthodox family moves from, say, Teaneck, New Jersey, to Jerusalem, how important would it be to adopt new tunes in shul, to dress less formally, right? All of a sudden, you take off your tie, you put on sandals instead of your nice, fancy shoes that you used to wear in Teaneck. Now you're in Jerusalem, you don't have to wear that stuff. How significant would it be to adopt new tunes and shul, right? So to dress less formally, to observe one day of Yom Tov rather than two, and to replace cholent that you had at Shabbat lunch in Teaneck with Yerushalmi Kugel, which if you should be so fortunate and blessed, you get to have in Jerusalem. Indeed, how significant, one of my favorite things in the world, by the way, Yerushalmi Kugel. Indeed, how significant would it be for the same family in Teaneck to leave their Ashkenazi shul and just go to a Sephardic one 3 blocks away in Teaneck with all of its differences in liturgy, nusach, and food. Like they could handle it. It's not that difficult. And just 2 more. Professor Tzvi Zohar is a very prominent professor at Bar Ilan of Jewish law. He wrote that it's not even clear who counts as Sephardic or Ashkenazic anymore, given geographical fluidity, marriage between Jews of different backgrounds, and interruption of transmission of tradition through secularization. I'm going to come back to this. And finally, as a newly observant Jew whose parents, grandparents, and even great-grandparents were secular, having abandoned Jewish tradition, in any meaningful sense bound to customs of the region, her ancestor departed from North America a century ago. So this I'm going to conclude with what my own take on this is, and I open it up for questions and comments. So when I was thinking about Kitniyot, this is what I determined. So my parents are not observant at all and never were. Their parents are not observant of Jewish law and never were. Their parents, to the best of my knowledge and my parents' knowledge, were also not observant at all, right? I am the freak of my family. Right? It turns out I've got some cousins in Milwaukee who became really Orthodox. They're fellow freaks, right? But very rare in my family. So if that's the case, to what extent am I meaningfully Ashkenazi? Because it seems to me our text taught us it really does not have to do with the geographical location. It's not the air, right? It has to do with a set of practices and customs which are passed down generation to generation, and they can be taken with you. But if that chain stops, right, it's about a community of custom. And if you are not a product of that community, right, then it seems to me you have to fashion your own customs and are not bound by that. It seems to me very clear. I'm not racially Ashkenazi. I mean, yes, if you do a DNA check, like you'll find they do it. My mom did this thing. Yes, they're from Ukraine. But that's not what they're talking about in the Talmud. They have no knowledge of or concern for that. It's all about what people are doing and what's taught and practiced. So for me, right, I had to kind of fashion my own Jewish life and my own path of observance. And you could say, well, I could take on the Ukrainian thing. I could get into Chassidut that comes from Ukraine. I mean, that's one pathway. But it seems to me it's kind of up to me. On the other hand, I know people like those Jews in Seattle who connect to roads for whom their connection to Sephardic culture is very strong and palpable, and it was passed on by their grandparents and their parents. And it seems to me clear the sources say, for that person, those customs are in fact binding. Now, we live in the United States. There's no law. They can do whatever they want, obviously. But at least, you could say spiritually, right? So our tradition valorizes and exalts the power of custom. But only, it seems to me, if it's part of something living that's passed down, right? Then it's hugely significant, right? But in my own particular case, it seems to me not so hugely significant. So the answer to the question of Kitniyot is, for me, I want there to be peace in the home, and I want us to be able to have Pesach home. And the halacha is extremely clear that Kitniyot is l'chol deot, according to every opinion. Kitniyot is not chametz in any way, shape, or form, so we eat Kitniyot, right? So it's because of shlom bayit. But I totally respect Ashkenazi Jews who say, no. I mean, this is a custom. It's about 700 years old. And it's the thing their family does and has always done. And the idea of eating like, lentils or rice on Pesach is like crazy. They couldn't imagine doing it, right? So for those people, I totally respect it. I don't think they're doing anything wrong or problematic. But for me, I love lentils on Pesach. Okay, let me stop there. I'm going to stop the screen share so I can see everybody. Okay, there we go. Oh, there's more people. So I'm happy to take questions, comments, disagreements, anything you'd like to share.
Check out the chat if you haven't already.
Oh, haven't chatted? I haven't even chatted. Okay, let me check. Okay, hold on. Some of you assume some. Okay, does Chazan face the Aaron Kodesh or the wait? Role of women and girls in the service. This was a very big issue for Beth girls when they got to Ramah. Right, that's from Nina and Earl. Right, isn't there a sense of gashing with ultra-Orthodox Jews who refuse to recognize other Jews? Yeah, I mean, look, I've said so. Let me go to that one. Gashing meaning turning. Okay, yes, but I would say don't put it on the ultra-Orthodox. I mean, I got to tell you, I taught at HUC for 10 years, and there was no less a sense of gashing there than in the ultra-Orthodox world. I mean, they would diss and say bad things and totally define themselves against, the bad guys, so to speak, in air quotes. So everybody kind of does it. It's almost like the Jewish way. I mean, we've seen, it goes back to the Talmud. If they're talking about it, what does that mean? It was a problem, right? So yes, I mean, I think it is a thing. We're not supposed to form into agudot, and yet this is what we do. There's a realization that, and every attempt to overcome it has failed, whether through text like the Shulchan Aruch or through the chief rabbinate in Israel. I want to say, sorry, are you kidding me? Like Orthodox Jews in Israel don't even like the chief rabbinate in Israel, right? So it doesn't unify anybody. So no, we just have to live this way and do our best, to sort of remain in some sense a united people with all of our disagreements and agudot. Do we wait for other congregations? The community needs are urgent and our neighbors don't. I'm not sure. Kevin, can you explain that, Kevin? Do we wait for other congregations? What is this? Can you explain? Kevin, you there? No?
Forgive me, I'm here and working on the next chat.
Oh, okay.
As far as trying to move with the entire Jewish community,
oh, I see.
There are things that Beth Jacob is committed to that our neighbors down the street might not be.
Oh, I see.
And of course, we want to do what we want. And of course, we want to discuss it.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean we're going to try to figure out the collective.
Yeah. No. So, I mean, in the case of that one text, I guess the idea would be that, if it's okay. For example, my understanding is Beth Jacob is quite different in lots of ways from other conservative synagogues in the Twin Cities, right? Probably in some significant ways and some little tiny ritual ways that aren't such a big deal. And the idea is, like, if somehow Beth Jacob, I don't know, we all like magically lifted the synagogue and all of us, and we moved to some other city, would we have to take on the practice of another synagogue or the practice of the Jewish community in that city? And the answer is no. We could have our own practice, and they would have to respect that. And so then the question is, how do we get along with each other? That's sort of people just get used to the idea of doing things. I mean, I have to say, it is fascinating to me how, just take the Kedusha, right, when davening, right, the Kedusha. I mean, I have seen it done in so many different ways, to so many different tunes. And what always kind of kills me is, I'll bring a particular tune, I'm visiting a synagogue, and people are sort of shocked, like, oh my, what is that you're doing, right? And it is like, because sometimes people think like, this is just the Kedusha, because you're so used to the way it's done in your shul. And, in a sense, that's okay, because people have their own customs, and whoever comes in there, like, for example, when I come, let's say I come and I'm leading davening now. I'm not used to your tunes. Now, do I just bring in my tunes? I mean, that would not, maybe once in a while, and I give people warning, and we see if you like them. But I think it would be wrong of me to just, like a bull in a china shop, say, there's a new sheriff in town, and I've got some new tunes, right? I mean, you're a community. You have your own tunes. That's okay, right? So I have to honor that. Not only that, I mean, the text said if I'm an individual moving to the, I have to kind of defer to the predominant customs, right? So let's see, from Anne to everyone. This also begs the question about converts. Oh, great question. Anne, where's Anne? Let's see, oh, Anne, hi, Anne. Okay, such a good question. I actually am not sure to the answer to this. I think I know. But like, okay, so let's say somebody converts to Judaism. Are they Sephardi? Are they Ashkenazi? Do they wait 1 hour after eating meat? Do they wait 6 hours? Or, you know what the thing that, so many people wait 3 hours, just as inside. You know where 3 hours came from? Camp Ramah. That's where it came from. Like no text, no, it's just like 1 hour is in the text, 6 hours, yes. Camp Ramah, that's 3 hours. Anyway, so my sense is that basically the convert gets to decide, and how do they make the decision? I think it could be like the community they're in, right? You usually come into the Jewish community through a particular synagogue. So it would, I think, likely be through, you know, maybe they connect with a particular family or a rabbi or, you know, a teacher. So then they would have to kind of make a decision. But there, I mean, clearly there's absolutely no racial, ethnic, whatever you want to call it, at all, right? So they just have to make the decision. And I think it probably has to do with the community through which they enter the you know, Judaism. So, wait, hold on, clearly you are welcome. Thanks, Kevin. What about the value of maintaining shared traditions to bind together family members who are geographically, oh, that's good, yeah. No, it's true. I mean, it's like, well, you know, if you do Pesach a certain way, did anybody here see the movie Avalon? It was a long time.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, Avalon, Barry Levinson. Right?
Oh my God, you cut the turkey.
Exactly, you cut the turkey. Okay.
My sister and I almost died with that because that was our Uncle Harvey.
There you go.
For
those who haven't seen it, it's the story of American immigration. These immigrants, they're clearly supposed to be Jewish, though oddly,
they're Jewish.
They're obviously Jewish, but they didn't come out as Jewish, whatever. They come, they build a business, everything's fine, tight family, 4 brothers, they're all in the business. And then it's sort of the story of how they gradually, you know, TV comes in, everybody starts watching TV in their own room, you know, and then they have Thanksgiving and they don't wait for one of the brothers to cut the turkey. He walks in and says, "You cut the turkey?" And he can't believe it. He walks out, right? And it seems so silly on one level. What's he so upset about? He was late. But the whole point is they didn't respect him and his family enough. Like this was supposed to be a family thing, and that they're all supposed to be together, right? So it was like the movie is about the breakdown of precisely this, of having these kind of family togetherness.
That was the straw that broke the camel's back.
Exactly, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. So I think yes, very much so. And for those of you, I mean, I'm guessing a lot of people at Jacob are like me. Like some people are searchers. You might have broken from the rest of your family in some ways. It can make it, you know, quite difficult and sort of lonely in a way. You have to construct your own Jewish path. But for those who are lucky enough, I mean, I have some friends like this, you know, who just are so rooted in the practice and custom of what their families do. It's this incredibly beautiful thing. And I just didn't really have that. But I do think it has a great power to, you know, a sense of rootedness, of binding, for sure. Let's see. What? I could be waiting an hour, says Tess. That's great. Yeah. I'm not going to tell you about the famous Tosafot. It says you only have to brush your teeth. I didn't say anything. Okay. But no, really, that is a thing, but nobody holds by it. Yes. So there is a custom. I'll just tell you, it's very interesting. It says, so Rabbi Caro, the Mechaber, the writer of the Shulchan Aruch, says 6 hours. 6 hours. You wait 6 hours to have dairy after eating meat. But then the Ramah, Rabbi Moshe Yisrael, who was in Krakow, who was the Ashkenazi main pastor, says, you know what? By us, we don't do that. We do 1 hour, right? But then he says, alas, yesh lahachmir. But if you want to be strict, wait 6 hours, right? And so the predominant Ashkenazi custom became, we should probably be strict and wait 6 hours. But there are certain communities, like I think, there's some German communities that, you know, that resisted and just did an hour. I think even a community, maybe in the Dutch Jewish community, waited an hour. So that was a thing. But 6 became the predominant one. And then, Camper Ma came along and said, no, let's, 1, 6, let's just do 3. Let's see. Do the Orthodox then sacrifice animals? What if there's no? Yeah, that's a little bit off topic, but I don't believe so. I do not have any inside knowledge that sacrificing animals is coming back. I suppose they can come to a Jimmy Reform friends. Okay. Other questions, comments from anybody about their own customs? Oh, please hold on. That is Linda. Yes, Linda.
My background is in immigration history, and most immigration historians agree, whether they're Jewish or not, that what endures is the cuisine. So I'm happy you titled this bagels, Blintzes, and Bourekas.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's funny because I am, I generally for my own, I lived in Israel off and on for 4 years, and I kind of developed my Jewish taste there, which means mostly Middle Eastern, food. And I have very dear friends when we were in grad school, Israelis from Morocco and Iraq, who were very good cooks. I got into that. I'm not a self-hater. I like a good brisket as much as the next Ashkenazi Jew.
What about your parents? Did they make brisket?
They did,
Oh, there you go.
It's true, but it's true, but it's sort of what they knew, and it wasn't very good. Quite honestly, my mom would be the first to say she wasn't a great cook. I've had great Ashkenazi food, but this was part of my self-fashioning, where I, kind of became seriously Jewish in a distinctive way. Other comments, questions? No? Okay, good.
I'll share.
Yeah, please. Who are you? Who's talking?
Orit. It's Orit. Oh, Esther, you go first.
Please, Orit. Yes, Orit.
Esther, you go first, because mine's funny.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I come from a very large Sephardic family, huge. I mean, 5 sisters and 2 sons and their children's children. And my mom was the youngest of those. And so my sister and I were the youngest. So I think that for this idea of hanging on to the past, for many of us in our family, we heard story after story after story of the Inquisition, etc. I have family from your mention of Rhodes. I have a whole bunch of them that live there, that are that used to come from there. They're not alive anymore, but they were in Seattle, and they had one minhag and everybody. But I wonder if this whole concept of memory, if you tell your children, or if you raise your children in a family, or if you're so close to that first generation years ago, and you listen to all those stories, you're liable to consider respect. Memory is a kind of respect. If you remember the past, it's a kind of respect, just like we remember people with Kaddish when they die. It's a kind of respect. And so for me, when I started going to synagogue and going to shul, nobody did anything the way it sounded in my house. So I kind of have a very, very big mixture. And to me, that is a kind of richness. It's a kind of goodness. And I don't see the squabble too much about it. But that's kind of where I'm coming from. And by the way, there's another Behar somewhere in there. Hello. My mother's name was Behar.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
So, Orit, did you want to share something?
So you'll enjoy this. My parents are both Sabras from Israel, and my mother's background is Polish, completely non-religious, and my father's background is Yemenite and very religious. So I always say that the religion we don't practice is Yemenite Orthodoxy.
That's nice.
And we were not at all involved in the Jewish community here in Minnesota, even though I was born and raised here. And so when I moved to college, I was shocked to find out all of these traditions and things that I had never heard of, like not eating kitniot.
Right, sure.
I'd never even heard of the concept of not eating kitniot. However, we do not eat hummus at all during Pesach because hummus and chametz start with the same letter. And apparently that's just a Yemenite, like little tiny thing.
Yeah, totally.
And no one I know has ever like else done that. And I would never eat hummus during Pesach. I couldn't bring myself
Couldn't do
to
it.
do it.
It'd be like being a piece of bread. It'd be like a piece of bread.
Yeah, even though no one in my family would consider themselves religious. I am the black sheep of my family.
Right. That's that's very. Raise your hand. Anybody here do fish heads on Rosh Hashanah? That's an old Ashkenazi. Fish head.
We do fish heads.
Do you?
Yeah.
So fish head, right? So it should be like your ear should be like the head and not the tail.
Yeah.
Right. That's an old custom.
My Bubby made her what do you call it? The gefilte fish. That a fish head was in the soup the broth when she was cooking it, but it didn't get served.
It didn't get served. Okay, gotcha. Well, oh yes, please. Hold on. That is Riva. Yes, Riva, you're muted, so you need to unmute yourself. There you go.
My junior year in college, I lived in Aix-en-Provence, France, and before the holidays, went to the synagogue, and a family invited me to dine with them. And the synagogue was mostly composed of Jews from North Africa. And the customs that I learned that year at Rosh Hashanah I had never experienced before, and they were so colorful and symbolic and meaningful. So we passed around a teaspoon for everybody with sesame seeds so that the blessings during the year should be as abundant as the sesame seeds. And then we passed around teaspoons with pomegranate seeds, and it was the same idea. And no salad was served at the meal because the typical salad dressing has vinegar in it, and you didn't want to eat anything sour on Rosh Hashanah.
Oh, nice.
You only want to eat sweet things to symbolize the sweet year. And then they also had the fish head, so you should be a head and not a tail. It was a wonderful introduction for me too. Plus, on top of that, the services were held in the Opera House in Aix-en-Provence. It's just a wonderful introduction to other customs for Rosh Hashanah.
So thank you so much. So we're running out of time. I just want to leave you with a couple things to think about. So I had a dear friend, Professor Steve Lowenberg, of blessed memory, actually just passed away about 3 weeks ago, who was a prominent academic, a wonderful historian of Germany, who came from a very Orthodox family and was himself modern Orthodox. Grew up in Washington Heights, New York, right? And there's a whole world of German Jews. His family. He died relatively young, like 68. His parents were from Germany. He was fluent in German. Grew up in that world. Wrote about it. It was a scholarly interest. He did some research for a book in France, and when he lived there, he basically stayed with this Orthodox family from North Africa, Tunisian, I believe. And he so totally fell in love with the way they davened, right, the music and the culture, that he basically took on. I mean, it's fascinating. He's very Orthodox, but he kind of like if you stood next to him while he davened, he sounded like a Jew from Tunis. Like his accent, he just completely took on this new world that he totally loved. So there you have a kind of rare case, I think, of where he's leaving the thing that he was brought up in, chose to. And the last thing I'll say is that some of you might know I have an interest in Yiddish, and I studied Yiddish in grad school. But when they teach you Yiddish in grad school, it's like Yivo Yiddish. It's sort of stiff and academic. And I went to a Yiddish camp in the Berkshires for a week, no English allowed. And there were actual native speakers there who spoke what I would call real Yiddish, right? And my Yiddish was I probably sounded like the equivalent of, a dictionary. And what I learned there was there's a difference between the rules, like the sort of sort of a neutral thing, and something with tam v'reach, like taste and smell, something that was like really rooted in actual, living experience and custom. It was like almost like a different language. So I feel like these things, these customs, add. We might be into tefillin or davening and like all the things we do, the mitzvot, but this is the tam v'reach, the taste and smell of Jewish life as it's lived, right? And so I feel like I missed that because I just did not have, Orit, I had neither the Polish nor the Yemenite. You know, I didn't have either one, right? And that it's something, if we have it, it's very precious. And our tradition clearly sees value in it, such that it's seen as almost commanding, right? That it's that important. So I thank you all very much. We had a really nice crowd again for changing the night. I very much appreciate your flexibility. I'm so sorry about that. And it was a delight to see you. And I guess next stop, Mendota Heights. We're moving next week. So wish us luck.
Mazel tov on packing up all of your books so far.
Thank you. Yeah.
Great progress.
Safe travels.
Thank you so much, everybody. Great to see you. And thank you to Orit.
Safe travel.
Rabbi.
Bye-bye.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
Lakota.
Yes,
Good luck.
slicha.
See you soon.
Thank you. See you soon. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
So long, safe travels.